This show does not provide medical advice. If you're having a medical emergency, please call 911. Anything you hear here should be discussed with your primary health care provider. Hello, and welcome to Everyone Dies, the show produced by Passionate World Talk Radio, whose goal is to educate, enlighten, and entertain. I'm Marianne Matzo, and for the next 30 minutes or so, I am your host. I am a certified nurse practitioner, certified in oncology, palliative care, and gerontology, and this show is to help people talk about and listen to and learn about our mortality, palliative care, hospice care, and serious illness. Today, we're talking with Noble Livingston. Now, Noble has been in a situation of being a person who makes decisions for his, in this case, for his mom. So when you have an advance directive, you can appoint, I almost said anoint, so there's my Catholic background coming out. You can appoint somebody or name somebody who will make decisions for you when you're not able to. So if you're in a situation where you can't speak for yourself, you name somebody who will do that for you. And if you haven't listened to our podcast about advance directives, that might be a good place to learn about advance directives and decision makers. And you can find that advance directive podcast on our website at everyonedies.org. It's EVERY, the number 1, dies.org. And so I want to welcome Noble. Hi, Noble.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being on. And so you were in a situation, you were living in Florida, and your mom was up in Ohio, is that correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, up in Ohio, and she had a pinched nerve, and she'd gone to the hospital. And what happened after that?
Well, she was admitted once. It was actually on her birthday, and they just thought it was a pinched nerve and released her. And about 3 days later, she went back in again via ambulance. And true to form, mother would not let them come get her in the ambulance until she had her makeup on. There's a good reason for pointing that out later in the discussion. But my brother and I had been in very good contact. He lives in Ohio, not far from her, where she was. And she went in the second time, and they thought it might have been sciatica in combination with that, and it was just very, very debilitating, and she couldn't walk. So they admitted, and they kept a close eye on things. And another complication arose with her intestines. And they needed, after about 6 or 7 days, to go in and do surgery. And they discovered that she had a hernia that was strangulating part of her intestines. It created a very detrimental situation for her.
Mm-hmm.
They advised my brother, which he passed on to me, that it didn't look good, and they would have to do a series of surgeries for her, and there would be possible extensive rehabilitation. It would be a day-by-day, and she would probably have to have a colostomy and permanent colostomy. And they, in between the 2 surgeries, had her on a ventilator. And her and I had that discussion more than once in the recent past about she didn't want any heroic measures and no life support. I'm familiar with hospice from being a volunteer, and those discussions were common with the 2 of us. Not so much with my brother. They had other things that they talked about that she probably couldn't talk about with me, but he was unaware of those decisions until he read the will. the day before I left, and he realized that since she was on life support, that's not what she wanted, that we probably ought to really make some decisions.
Mm-hmm.
So I left on April 30th and with my wife and drove up all night long straight through, and we got to the hospital. And I rounded the corner and saw her on the vent, and I shook my head and said, no, this is not what she would want. And I knew that had she been coherent, she would have been probably pretty upset with me.
So she wasn't awake and able to talk to anybody and say what she wanted or what she didn't want?
Correct.
Okay.
She had the second surgery, and that morning was scheduled for a third, and it was to try and do some more repairs to the intestines and so forth, and she just, there's no way that she would have wanted to go through all that and to be in assisted living. She had her independence. She was 86 years old. She lived a full life. She had cleaned her house, spotless. She even power washed it probably 3 weeks prior to going in the hospital. And she was very, very proud of being independent, and that she wanted that independence. She didn't want to stay with any of us, either of us, my brother or myself, if she needed to. And I don't regret making the decision with my brother to let nature take its course.
Mm-hmm. And that's really what those decisions are about, right? Either doing intense interventions, being on a ventilator, doing multiple additional surgeries, and then you're right, at 86, you're going to, or probably at any age, if you're in the hospital for any amount of time, there's going to be some serious rehab that's going to be necessary. And what happens as we age is that we may not have the reserve in order to come back from things. If you're 30, there's a reserve of your health and your fitness that allows you to bounce back. And at 50, you have less reserve than you had at 30, but more reserve than you would have, at 70, and so on. So at 86, there's a certain amount of reserve that, allowed your mom to get through that first surgery and, maybe that second surgery, but every one of those days in the hospital, especially in an ICU, is more and more debilitating. And then how debilitated you are depends on your age. So she had, if I remember what you had said, they had kind of left her open, her abdomen open, so they were planning to go in and do additional surgery. So as her decision maker, what did you do then?
Well, as I mentioned, she was very concerned about her appearance and wanted to be, she was always well kept herself, as well as her house, car, everything. And I talked with my brother. I can't say enough about the great communication there. It was team mom and having my wife as well, because she's a registered nurse, and she was able to translate and sometimes offer things that we weren't catching and doctor and nurse speak. And it was a great team. But I asked if they could go ahead with the third surgery to close her up and make her tidy and a little more well kept. I don't think that she would have appreciated being just kind of unfinished, so to speak. And they were taken aback, because doctors and nurses, they're there to cure, they're there to heal, they're there to make you better. And they were a little shocked that we were requesting not to go any further. But she'd also, we've laid to rest 3 siblings over the years, and her heart was broken over that as well. And it factored into it. It all factored in to just deciding to take her off of the ventilator after the surgery and just let things go as natural as they can.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we did. And my brother and myself and my wife, we sat around her for about an hour and a half after that, and it was very peaceful. It was beautiful. And as a matter of fact, at one point, it just seemed like she was napping on the couch, snoring like I'd heard many times before, and it was comforting to know
mm-hmm.
that she was at rest. And it was just I don't regret any of it. It all felt right, and to this day I feel the same way. So
and so those, we I say frequently, an advance directive is really for your family. It's for you, so that you can lay out, here's what I'd like or here's what I wouldn't like, because when you're not going to be the one if you're in that situation, you can't hear what the doctors or what the nurses are saying in terms of, well, there's this option or this option. You're not awake for that. And so having a trusted person that you say, this person will make decisions for me as I would make decisions for myself. It's called substituted judgment, meaning that I can't hear the conversation. I can't hear the choices. This person can, and they're not doing what they want to do. They're doing what I want to do. And that can be really hard. Did you have any struggle with that, or did you say, I know what my role here is, and I'm going to do right by her?
Of course there was some. I to this day, I would love to have my mother here. And we loved her dearly. She was very loved by everyone that knew her. And, yeah, there was that struggle. What do I want? But I asked myself and my brother, can we just remove what we want from the equation and think about completely what would Mom want, what would she do, what would she say? And it didn't take but that brief part of the discussion to realize that, no, she wouldn't want to go through all the rehabilitation, sitting in a nursing home if possible, just existing and waiting to see if things got better. One thing she always said was, when I go to my reward. That was her way of describing when she dies, was when I go to my reward. And we truly believe she had one heck of a reward just by being up there and meeting her Maker and being reunited with family and children. And that in itself was just very comforting to know that she was getting her reward. So,
and also you and your brother were truly wonderful and selfless sons. I've heard people talk about feeling guilty doing for their parent what their parent wanted done, and you have the knowledge, and maybe you can talk about if it helped in terms of the grief of grieving your mom, but you have the knowledge of, I know what she wants, and the last gift I can give to her is to preserve her dignity and make the decisions as she would make those decisions. Do you think that that's impacted your grieving process?
I do, in a positive way. It was just a comfort to know that she did have that dignity, and she had her independence right up until her final days. And I have a sister that once told me when my father died, I tried to console her, and she said, I'm not crying for him, I'm crying for me.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a big lesson right there. And I learned right then and over the years that you just, when you're upset for your own loss.
Right.
Because if they are going to their reward, they're having a much more glorious experience than what you are, of course. Mm-hmm. And in my own beliefs, I think that she became 100% perfect. Mm-hmm. And that did help the grieving process. But I do miss her. And we both called her every day. We missed those phone calls. So.
Yeah. It's a tremendous loss to lose a parent, and it kind of really forces us to grow up. There isn't that buffer between, life and death for us anymore. As long as our parents are alive, it's like they're supposed to go first. Doesn't work out that way all the time, but they're that buffer in our mortality. But when our parent dies, our last parent dies especially, there's sort of like that mother may I game of take one giant step forward, and you're taking one giant step forward closer to your mortality because they're not there as that protection anymore. And we might not always be conscious of that's part of that loss, but that certainly is part of that loss.
Indeed it is, and the expression "the torch is passed."
Yeah,
it takes on a whole new light.
Yes. What's your best memory of your mom?
Oh, wow! There's just so many. But as we're on the subject now, those discussions and being open with her and her being open with me. That we didn't. When my sister died in 2012, we made a deal. We went to Alaska to say our final goodbyes, and it was almost a bit of a repeat because we got there within an hour and a half of her taking her final breath. Wow. And it was close to the same timing with my mother, but we made an agreement and said this is no time to shelter each other or sugarcoat anything, and we made a promise that we would keep upfront about whether we were sad, mad, whatever the emotion was at that moment, that we would put it out there and not try and protect the other one. And it really, really helped the process to have that honesty and to know that we weren't walking on eggshells or someone else wasn't walking on eggshells for us, mm-hmm. for either one of us. But I think the best memory is just her strength over the years and the way that she showed everybody that you can do it on your own if you have to. And she did. Mm-hmm. She did a really, really good job.
She sounds like an incredible woman. You're lucky to have her, as your guide and as your mom. It sounds like to me.
I agree. I couldn't agree more.
So, Noble, you mentioned that you have worked as a hospice volunteer. Did working in hospice and helping people, at the last days or weeks of their life, do you think that impacted how you were able to do for your mom what she wanted you to do? Do you think
Absolutely.
that played any? In what way do you think?
Many, because I think one of the first lessons I learned when I became a volunteer was an orientation from another person in orientation, and they said, statistics show that 1 out of every 1 person will experience death, which I think really plays well into the name of what you have going on there with everyone dies. And there were many, many things like that that were just eye-openers, and I met a lot of happy people that took care of sad situations, and while it seemed odd to me at first, it became a reality that you really do need happy people to take care of those situations to help see them through. And they taught me a lot about how to handle grief and someone else's grief. It was just, I certainly didn't learn everything that I could in the 5 years that I was volunteering, but it was a wealth of information and knowledge that was offered, and I soaked it up. I really am looking forward to getting back to it, to be honest with you. And
Noble was telling me that he wrote a book. He wrote it under his pen name, which is Noble Gentry, Gentry. And the book is called Needing to be Needed, but the first meaning is Kneading, to be needed, and that can be purchased on Amazon. What's that book about, Noble?
Thank you very much for the mention. It really is just a memoir of my experiences with hospice. Mm-hmm. And some of the interactions with the patients, and all the names have been changed, of course, for privacy, and things are kept very basic without a lot of detail, but they were just really touching moments that meant a lot to me, and I made a lot of what I call last-minute friends, and I cherish them, and I wouldn't trade a minute of any of it, and then I thought, this means enough to me that I could make myself sit down, which is tough to do. So I like to be on the go. Mm-hmm. And I kept a bit of a journal, and I put it down in paper and put it out in hopes of helping other people that are thinking about volunteering to maybe see the brighter side of it, because it's not just hand-holding and crying, and there are a lot of really positive, wonderful moments in those experiences, and I hope I did my best to try and convey those and share them.
There's a lot of living that goes on in hospice, and I often think that hospice has a really bad rep because people try to avoid it, and they say, well, that's where people go to die. And, first off, as you were saying, everyone dies. So if only everyone could just believe that, right? And then realize that you get your symptoms managed and you feel so much better, and you can have a really good quality of life right up until the end. There's always going to be something that goes wrong, and I've seen so many people who have cancer, and their assumption is it's the cancer that's going to result in your death. But a lot of times that's not what it is. It can be something totally unrelated. Having, again, thinking about our resilience, having the cancer certainly cut down on that resilience, our ability to fight different things. But we don't know at all what's going to be the thing that's going to end our life. And, it's not being in hospice that ends your life. It's whatever the disease process is. And it's, I used to work as a hospice nurse, and some of the, really good memories in my nursing career is from that work. So I'm looking forward to reading your book. And so, again, for people, it's Noble Gentry, Gentry, which is Noble's middle name. I'm telling on you, Noble. And it's available on Amazon, and it's Needing to be Needed, Kneading, to be needed. So any final thoughts, Noble, before we wrap up our interview?
Two of the most dominant thoughts would be touching on what you just mentioned, and people being scared of hospice or thinking they're the Grim Reaper. That I think the fear of dying is part of what makes it so difficult to face. Mm. And if you accept that it's going to happen and have the acceptance, I think that's the first key to anything, that everything else will flow from there. And to just really, when you're faced with a decision with a loved one about what to do to keep them alive or let them go, to remove your wants from the equation entirely, as difficult as that is, It really has to be about that person and what they would want and what would be ultimately best for them in the long run. And while it's a loss to us, it could very well be a gain to them to have the peace.
Yes, or to be pain-free or whatever. Or to maintain, in the case of your mom, maintain her dignity, which sounds like was really important to her.
It was, and I wouldn't trade a moment. I wouldn't trade a partner. We had a great team, Mom. Just all the world thanks to my brother for that, and my wife for just, that's important as well. It's just having a good support system. Mm-hmm. And while it was a very sad situation.
Good communication, yeah. Yeah.
Well, while it was a very sad situation, I really don't think it could have gone any better. And for that, I'm very, very grateful.
And I think your mom is really proud of her boys to do the hard thing and do what she wanted. That's not easy, and, I wouldn't minimize that at all. But if you two boys were mine, I'd be really proud of you.
Mom, I thank you for that. And I would have to agree with you because she did say if we screwed up, she was going to haunt us. And thank goodness I haven't encountered anything yet. I don't think that I will. But yeah, she always told us she would, and she hasn't. So
phew, you're not haunted. Well, thank you, Noble. Thank you for talking with me, and I hope that our listeners will be comforted with your words and learn from your words, and remember that when they're in a situation where they need to make decisions for people they love, to remove themselves from the equation, to do what it is that loved one wanted. So thank you so much, Noble, for doing this interview with me.
Thank you very much for having me.
And thank you to our audience for spending time with me during this show, Everyone Dies. You can read our blogs and listen to our other podcasts at everyonedies.org. That's EVERY, 1, dies.org. Remember that you can listen to Passionate World Talk Radio on Spreaker and our shows wherever you listen to podcasts. We want to thank Jeannie White, our producer, and Lillian Caldwell, our CEO. I hope that you live your best life every day, and remember, every day is a gift. Thank you for listening.